The tomb of Jesus Christ was discovered vacant on that first Easter morning. That's what the E stands for. The empty tomb. Jesus' body was laid in a tomb belonging to Joseph of Arimathea, who was a prominent member of the Jewish council. And the tomb was sealed. It was placed under heavy guard. And yet it was discovered empty, and this is very significant, by several women. So what? So what that women found it empty? What does that matter? It has huge implications for this reason. In first century Jewish culture, women were not considered reliable in terms of their testimony. That's just the belief, first century Jewish culture. They said women cannot even testify in a court of law because we can't trust the testimony of women. That's what they believed in the first century. Now, if the writers of the Gospels were going to make up stuff about the resurrection, if they were going to embellish or create it out of whole cloth, and they were going to try to convince people that it actually happened, there's no way that they would say that women discovered the tomb empty, because in the eyes of that first century audience that they were trying to convince, this would have hurt their credibility. They would have said, yeah, James discovered the tomb empty, or Peter did, or John did. But they don't. They say women discovered the tomb empty, even though that hurt their credibility among that first century Jewish audience that they were trying to convince. So why did they say it? The logical explanation is they reported women discovered the tomb empty because that's the way it happened. And even if it weakened their case to the audience they were trying to convince in the first century, they still reported it the way it happened because they were trying to be accurate about what it is that took place. So, I think that's a huge fact in favor of the reliability of the story of the empty tomb. But here's the most powerful fact about the empty tomb. Nobody ever claimed that it was anything but empty in the first century. Everybody conceded that the tomb was empty. Even the opponents of Jesus admitted that it was vacant on the first Easter morning. In fact, they had to make up a story that the disciples stole the body, which, they didn't have the means, the motives, or the opportunity to do that. It's a ridiculous, absurd story. And yet they had to come up with some way to explain how it got empty because everybody knew that the tomb was empty. The question is, how did it get empty? And when I first tried to figure this out as a skeptic, I went through a list of the possible suspects, and I couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation. First of all, the Romans weren't about to take the body. They wanted Jesus dead. The religious leaders weren't about to take the body. They wanted Jesus to stay dead. In fact, the Romans and the religious leaders would have loved to have produced the body and put it on a cart and drawn it by horse down Main Street of Jerusalem, because they would have spent, and they ended up spending so much time and effort trying to squelch this Christian movement. They could have done it in one afternoon. There's your Messiah. There's your Son of God. He's dead. Would have saved them a lot of time, money, and effort. Why didn't they do it? Because there was no body. There was no body to parade down Main Street, Jerusalem. The unrefuted testimony of history is that the tomb was empty that first Easter morning. Sir Norman Anderson, who was educated at Cambridge University, was offered a professorship for life at Harvard University, became the dean of the Faculty of Laws at London University, spent a lifetime analyzing the empty tomb from a perspective of law, and his conclusion is, quote, "The empty tomb forms a veritable rock on which all rationalistic theories of the resurrection dash themselves in vain." Historian Michael Green said, "The historian cannot justifiably deny the empty tomb. It's a fact of ancient history. There is no other explanation other than it was empty that first Easter morning."